Welcome to Nerdarchy for nerds by nerds. I am Nerder Doug, and tonight I am embarking on a campaign of lively chat with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Steve, how's it going, everybody? It's funny, like I can feel like I have something, and then it just petered out to us.
It did. I was thinking, totally.
We're doing it live, folks. We're doing
Yep.
it live.
So this is a great topic that you proposed, not only because it's just super broad and like deeply ingrained in the hobby of D&D in general, but also, spoiler alert, I didn't really prepare much for this because I worked my muggle job most of the day, so but I feel like we can get through it.
Well,
pretty easily.
I think I went in this direction just because we got the release of Dragonlance coming up. We got Flames
exactly what I
coming
was
up,
thinking. Yeah.
and it's like, all right, but how many more are they going to release? How many more settings are there? Like, so I did actually start doing a little homework to figure that stuff out, because it's very very curious, over the years how many, and like I had to sift through, like, some of them that were like, this is a web thing that they did back in X, and I was like, oh, okay.
What are you talking about?
For settings, there were some settings that were actually, instead of, they weren't published per se, but they were like web enhancements that Wizards put out.
Oh, really? For 5e, or are you talking about like
No, for previous editions.
Oh, like what? I mean, maybe I've heard.
Because I was looking, like, one of them was a UK thing,
Okay.
Polonus or something like that,
Hmm.
and I kind of just looked at, I just looked at the campaign settings that we haven't had yet,
Sure.
that we might get. So that's what I was kind of interested in.
Okay. Just before, when I was getting my raspberry lemon kombucha prepared, I was thinking about the topic, and I thought, well, it is kind of appropriate and timely with Dragonlance coming out, because the root of that term in the hobby is from the earliest days, when it transitioned from wargaming, and a campaign was like a campaign, or like in Game of Thrones, like the campaign against the Starks. It's like they're mobilizing their thing. So like a campaign, distilled down to D&D was sort of just like, well, your connected adventures, over time become the campaign. But in something like Dragonlance, I'm more and more, I find myself more excited about that, and not because I'm a huge Dragonlance fan, which, it's cool and everything, but I just really like a fantasy war campaign. Sounds pretty darn fun to me, because I like war stories. My favorite video game series is Mass Effect 3, which is essentially a war story on a huge scale, and it's fun. It's a dramatic backdrop, but you can still have all the things, and even moments of brevity and levity and stuff.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see how they do that in 5e and how it looks, because I feel like they've done a really good job of trying to highlight whatever the thing is
Right.
that they're doing with a particular adventure or setting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was
more so
one
with
of
the adventures, I guess, but Dragonlance, they're doing it as a setting, right? And like the backdrop is war.
Right. And yeah, and I think that it's, from what my understanding is, it's a pretty cool, because like in a lot of scenarios like that, where there's like established, like, well-known iconic characters, you think like, well, what am I going to do? But and they were off doing their things. But it sounds like this campaign is really like, it's about the war of the land. So it's like probably doing things for generals and becoming generals, and actually like affecting the war through your adventures.
Back in the day, did you play any Dragonlance?
Oh yeah, I played all the DL series, whole thing.
So we played Dragonlance, but we just
and those were interesting in that, like, they had the pre-gen characters, but you could also play your own characters, but you were just playing as those, like, if you played your own characters, just like, then you were the heroes of the lands, basically. Like, you went to Zach Sarah, I think, at the discs and Mishakal and all that stuff.
So when you played through those, did it feel like you were in a war scenario, or did it just feel like regular adventures but set in this Dragonlance setting?
Well, it's tough to say. I was a little kid, so I probably wasn't as thinking about it in those. So, I was just like, oh wow, we get to do the thing. And in the books, they really didn't. interact with the war part. Like it wasn't their primary thing. Like, and it was actually a lot like Mass Effect in the sense, and that's probably like a clever way to do those kind of things. It's like, well, you're the hero, but you do, it's like you're part of the team that does things that, while the other people are doing like military operations, like you're a special team, right?
I gotta say, I am far more excited for Planescape than I am Dragonlance.
Oh yeah, I just like the war story part of it. I think that'll be fun.
Yeah, so like I don't know, there is definitely some cool things about Dragonlance, but like I found like niche things that weren't really in the books as much. That were more interesting to me. Because
me too. I guess to know that, having said that, like thinking back, I was probably more interested in that than the actual war. Like it wasn't, like an interesting topic to me, but it is now as an adult because it's like that's a pretty big, impactful, dramatic thing going on. So.
Yeah. There was a box set called Talisade or something like that. I'm probably butchering. I know I've mentioned it here on the channel before, but most of it's centered around one of the Minotaur kingdoms, and it wasn't like the primary ones. And then also like they had these gnomes, which the gnomes were locked in this like war, and had been for a long time. With these, I forget what they were, but they were fire creatures, and they lived at the center of like a volcano, a sea of lava. So they had these like metal boats they would use to sail across.
Were they those weird baby-looking dudes from?
Lava Child, the Lava Child. Yeah. I don't think it was the Lava Child, but yeah, those guys were
freaky, man. Yeah,
but they had this. Something called the Company of the Dead, and basically when the gnomes would join it, they would hold a funeral for them because they were supposed to represent them like letting go of all attachments to the living. And, so basically they were just like special forces psycho murder gnomes, and I think they would wear like creepy masks or something as well. And so like I really locked onto that stuff, and then. There was a couple novels.
You did have it right, Christopher Charles in the chase. So it sounds like the Taladas box set. That's what you
said. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And then much later, they came out with a couple of novels that were centered around Draconians.
Oh yeah, okay.
There was two. I believe there was only two of them. I don't think they did a full trilogy. And which was really cool because Draconians was one of the coolest things from the Dragonlance setting. I mean,
for sure.
I would say the predecessors to Dragonborn essentially, but they were cooler than Dragonborn.
Oh yeah, for sure. They did an awesome origin story.
Plus, like the first time you encountered them playing, it just sucked when you finally killed one.
Your sword gets stuck in it, or it blows up in your face, or whatever.
It becomes a pool of acid or whatever. Yeah. Whatever nonsense.
They were the precursors to what are now methods.
They all have
those death burst abilities. Thinking back, it's like, well, when I was a kid, we mostly in 1E AD&D, we just played modules all the time.
Yeah.
And I never really thought about the setting at all because it was just like you're at the dungeon entrance. I mean that was the DM text. In those days, it was like you have chosen to take the quest from King blah blah blah, and here's a bunch of lore, and here's what the objective is, and here's all about the dungeon, and you're at the door.
Yeah. Well, kind of.
So there wasn't really think about the setting too much.
When I run games now, and like we're getting ready for our session 0. Then like I think of like 3, 4, 5 settings that I want to run in that I'm going to probably make up, just before we play. And that's how we got Court of Worms. That's how we got Under the Dome.
That's interesting because I always assumed that all the campaigns you ran were in the same setting, maybe just at different times, or not. I mean, because a planet's a very big place, like. Yeah. Court of Worms, I always assumed like, in Elfgania, there's just like some, Land of the Lost area that's like, yep, it's just, there's dinosaurs there and stuff. Or like Under the Dome, I always just assumed it's like that's in the future.
I have tied them into the overarching world we had been using since the beginning. in that sense, like, yeah, the Court of Worms is a lost hidden vow in our world. And then, Under the Dome is the future.
I guess
So you're
that's
not
the
wrong.
beauty of campaign settings in general, whether you homebrew or play in one consistently, or even with like Spelljammer or Planescape or Radiant Citadel or Dream of the Blue Veil cast upon you or whatever, is you can go to those other places. But not only just within one campaign, it's also a setting in which a lot of campaigns can take place. Hence the name campaign setting. So, like in your Under the Dome game, like let's say it continued or you revisited it or the characters just got a wild hair up their ass because the players know it's in that same world.
Yeah.
And like, well, maybe they concoct some reason to want to go to where like Rylor was, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, and then as a DM, it's like, oh wow, that's exciting. It's like now I can, play with your own world. Like as a game master, dungeon master myself, I kind of assume any game I run is in the same setting in my sort of head canon, especially when you start, incorporating concepts like the multiverse or like interplanetary travel. It's like, yeah, why not?
So oddly enough,
Star
right?
Wars is in our galaxy. It's
You
just
can totally do that. You can have multiple settings all in the same world, right?
Mhm.
Quote unquote. I mean,
Right.
look at basically D&D's done that. Like I've got a list here of 15 places, 15 campaign settings that they haven't done yet.
And they're probably just all in.
But 6 of them are Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah, sure. Rokugan and Chult and
so they got it broken down into
the Savage Frontier.
Al-Qadim?
Oh yeah, Al-Qadim, yeah.
Arcane Age, I have no idea what that one is.
Never heard of that.
The Horde, I had that. That was pretty cool. I remember that box set. Qatar was another box set. Melatra, The Living Jungle. I've heard of that, but I'm not really familiar with it.
I've heard of Maztica. Yeah.
And the Maztica setting, which it probably doesn't hold up today. It probably needs a little help. But having read it in high school, as a teenager, Jaguar Knights and Eagle Knights were badass.
That sounds pretty badass to me right now.
Yeah, for sure. And then, like, in addition to that, like, one of the themes of those novels was like the clash of cultures, coming together, and part of it is like this priest is being sacrificed on an altar, to their gods, and like then like they kind of depict the struggle between the gods, these new gods and this old god, over the soul of this mortal.
Those old campaign settings in novels like leaned into like the gods aspect a lot, didn't they? Even Dragonlance, I mean, it was essentially god war between
well, Dragonlance, you couldn't go past 18th level, because if you did, the gods would just remove you.
Right. So that's not something they dwell on too much in 5e, which is cool. I don't mind that. Are you checking out the chat?
I'll read the comments. The butchery. What do you think about the butchery is done to Dragonborn in 6e? They just said they kind of just reset them almost to the player's handbook with a slightly weaker breath weapon that you can do more often.
Well, yeah, I would hesitate to always, to take that to look at things through that lens. Though it's just like, oh, they want to do that. It's like, no, they shared a play test to see what people wanted.
Yeah.
And I suspect that a lot of people will be like, yeah, no, give me the Fizzbands one, and we'll probably just end up with that.
Yeah, it is kind of weird that they didn't go there first, especially in the playtest, because in the playtest, a lot of times it seems like they go with the stronger or more powerful version first, and then whittle it down.
Maybe they want to gauge, test the idea of like, well, is there a lot of people who feel like, there's power creep, or like maybe there is a lot of unspoken people out there who feel like, no, just keep the Dragonborn the way they are. But if I suspect they will, the results of that will be will show that people want the Fizzbins version or something different than the. You want to when you're a dragon person, you want to breathe. You want your breath weapon to be cool and functional, useful, right? I mean, aside from all the other things, like, yeah, sure, resistance is cool, but it's like, what's the fantasy of playing a dragon person? You want to
You
use
want
a
to breathe
breath
fire
weapon.
on somebody,
Yeah.
right? Like that. That goes back to the Saber dice game that Geislanders had run for us, Stones of Karos. And like it literally opened up with we're gonna be dragging like these dragon like gods. And I just remember Cody from Taking 20 trying so hard to like role play in this moment of being this dragon god. And
Uh-huh.
I'm looking, I'm like, is this fucking guy for real? I'm a dragon god. I'm gonna go breathe fire on someone's face.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk.
Oh, I see my name in the chat. Okay, let's see.
Hmm.
Matthew Leonard says, I'm sorry, Doug, I got caught up on wild hairs. How did it get there? Oh, I know the answer. Did the person themselves place the wild hair? Did the hair act on some fruition, or was it placed by another? Well, clearly, anything that has to do with hair and D&D is the source is the strange and tangled beard dimension. So that definitely sounds like a beardomantic mystery to me.
For sure. That we won't be exploring here today.
No.
Talking about like the playtest stuff, it took me a long time to come to grips with the fact that sometimes they just are testing a mechanic out over and over again
Yeah.
to see how it works under different circumstances. So like we as players will look at something without looking at the entirety of it, and it's a lot easier to judge it harshly that way
Right.
and misunderstand the fact that they're trying to figure something out in a larger scope of the game.
Yeah, which kind of makes it difficult to play test too. Like it's sort of we were talking about this before we went live, as far as like with the criticals, like only players can get them, and it's only on the weapon or unarmed attack itself dice. And it's like, that nerfs like divine smite and sneak attack. It's like, well, but we didn't see the class stuff yet, so those features might also change to accommodate or mitigate that in some way. But it also makes it weird to play test because it's like, well, then I can't really say how I truly feel about it, not knowing if other things will also be affected.
So, are there any settings in chat? You chime in too that you feel like you absolutely need to see in 5e, because kind of like for me, I was like, Forgotten Realms, nope, don't need it. Greyhawk, nope, don't need it. Dragonlance, nope, don't need it.
Like, well, it's weird because if I had to pick a favorite published campaign setting from D&D history, I'd have to go with Spelljammer because it's just fun, and I've had a lot of fun back in the day, and also in 5e playing it. But it kind of like crystallized my perspective on that very question when the campaign setting just came out. It's cool, but it's like I don't need a book to like. I just play those things anyway. It's like so I don't really care that much. So like in that sense,
they didn't go deep enough in there to make you go, I needed this. Like, oh, I could have just did this anyway.
I mean, I don't know. It's just it's hard to like articulate. It's and maybe you can help me, but it's like it's like when I play D&D, I'm just going to play what in whatever setting or here. I'll tie it into tonight's topic because this is a very Nerdarchy thing to do. Is our campaigns are very short typically, right? It's like default when there's a Nerdarchy game, whether it's online or in our home games or whatever thing. 9 times out of 10, it's 12 sessions, and it's about a certain thing, and it's usually like it's a campaign, right? It's like themed, but there's no story. I guess that's the difference. Like we're not playing like a story campaign. It's just like the theme, right? Like you're under the dome. It's like I don't know what's going to happen. I just wanted to play a game where this is the setting and the campaign is set within it, and I want to see what the players are going to do. Or if you're a player, I want to explore that setting, right? So in that sense, it's like we are always, or even if and even if we're playing like a published adventure, players go off script or off book all the time, and you just end up like making stuff up. So when it comes to like campaign settings, like nothing they put out is going to be like, wow, that's a cool mechanic. Oh my god, that's going to drastically change my game. It's like I don't like that's just not even that interesting to me, like mechanical stuff. Because it's like there's plenty there, or I'll just make something up, or there's like countless sources on the internet with similar offerings. So it's never like, when it's official, it's like, oh, well, now I can play it. And they're like, wow, that just blew my mind. It's like, I don't care if it's official or whatever.
I will say I found Ebron helpful as far as settings go, just because that setting is so much different than all the rest. Dark Sun would be the same way, but I hate to tell you, folks, if we do get a Dark Sun, you're probably going to hate it. For the people that
I don't
really
understand
want Dark
that.
Sun, well,
What's the problem? Like, I mean, is it? I'm maybe just being naive. But it's like, what? I always hear that's like they'll never do that. I don't get it. Why?
I just don't think they're going to really lean into the dark, gritty, all the slave tropes and the harshness that was Dark Sun. Like,
I mean, there's some pretty harsh stuff in Van Richten's guide.
Yeah, the horror stuff. I don't know why. I feel like that feels more acceptable and for them to delve into than Dark Sun, and
Okay, well, fair enough.
I think it's the slavery issue, right? It's the slavery thing is a big part of that setting, and I don't think they're going to want to touch it.
I mean, you're not slavers, and plenty of. I mean, if there's a creature that lives in the Underdark in the monster manual, it's probably enslaved by something else, or itself
is enslaving things. Yes.
But whatever, I get. At the same time, well, okay. Here, back you mentioned this way earlier of like how different adventures and campaign settings sort of like highlight different things. That was something that it seems that early in 5e was like a selling point that they seem to have kept doing, but never really verbalized that. I don't understand why. Where it's like every book is supposed to be like exploration of some aspect of the game, right? Like Out of the Abyss was like subterranean adventure book too, or like Acquisitions Inc. It's like, yeah, it's like the the stream you love, and also it's like a way to make downtime really interesting and stuff like that, right? So I don't know. I kind of lost my thread there.
I mean, I think they're still trying to do that.
Yeah.
And I just feel like Dark Sun is going to have some aspects that they don't want to explore.
So I could see, maybe Dark Sun 5e would be something like a survival, more of a survival type setting, right? Where it's just like it's harsh in the sense of like, because there is stuff in the book about exhaustion and extreme heat and all that. It's like maybe it would just explore that, right? And like, maybe not even focus on Dark Sun per se. It could be like, I don't know, it could be like a guidebook on like how to just make like tough survival type things, whether it's in the Arctic or whatever. And I see what you're saying though. Dark Sun has a lot of specific like defiling and all that.
So, and then on top of that, right, with Dark Sun is like it is the least magic setting of all the settings, or even if and the magic that is there is considered it's considered the bad is considered bad or evil by most of the populace, even though you have preservers that aren't doing it. So it would definitely Dark Sun rated M for mature. Yeah, definitely. And I think it would require also it requires a lot of psionics, right? Because we don't really have that yet. And that basically psionics replaces magic.
Right.
How magic works actually changes. And then also, now less of an issue is the divine magic. So, but that is still definitely
the divine magic came from the Sorcerer Kings, right? Like they gave the Templars. That's what they got.
So the Templars is one aspect, and the other is there was elemental priests.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So.
Well, you know what? Maybe you remember, because like one thing that always seems to, when Dark Sun comes up is like the defiling and preserving. They're like, well, how would you? Like, I don't know, like that would be tricky to represent mechanically. How did they do it in second? I mean, it's been done. So I don't, it's like, was it, or do you think people just feel more need for like a clear, like parameters of it?
So like there were mechanics like when you cast a spell and you defiled, like it just left scorch earth in a radius.
Okay.
And then like if you use preserver magic, I think it took longer to cast your spells because you had to channel the energy and draw it from further away.
Oh yeah, that's right. Back in those editions, spells could take like several rounds to cast, right?
And then they also they also had different level progressions for a preserver and defiler. Like the defiler mages just flew right through the levels, but
Oh yeah.
also even the bad guys hated you. So
I guess I could see, thinking of it that now makes me think like that would be more of the reason it wouldn't show up in 5e is because it's like, you know, everybody's samey. It's just like, well, we can't have people that it's like get advanced differently than the others, or like,
oh
things
yeah.
easier for that. You know what I mean? Like that seems more likely the reason than the
we
other
we can
themes.
handle slavery, but this different levels advancement. Now, I think sorcerers would actually work better in Dark Sun from 5e than any other the arcane casters. Like
Yeah.
I can definitely see that because you could use the sorcery points as kind of your way to deal with preserving magic and defiling magic and your meta magics.
Hmm.
And it's not true, Parks. That's propaganda. The halflings were not cannibals in Dark Sun. They did not eat other halflings.
I was just thinking that. I was like, yeah, they.
But anybody else was fair game. It's also where we really got. It's the first place we got Thrycreen as a player race.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would really like to see a more like a campaign setting that just would explore provide guidance for that sort of thing, because that and make that exciting. I guess that's one thing that would excite me, because the idea of a game, of a campaign that's like, like things like your food and water and if it's hot or cold sound kind of fun to me. Usually I think those things would be fun in like a long-term sense. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, because like, hey, if we're only getting together for 2 hours and we spend that 2 hours like hiking 2 miles and making sure I didn't starve to death that day, it's pretty boring, right? So I would be interested to see what they would, because especially in the light of like that Light of Xerxes adventure, which is totally designed with that in mind. It's like, look, people aren't playing for like 8 hours at a time anymore. It's like there's 12 little session adventures. They're about 2 to 3 hours each. That's a campaign. So something that would make those sort of elements exciting. I'd like to see what they would offer for that.
Well, I think the other thing was, uh, which is a little tricky too, is you don't have metal. Metal's super rare,
Mm-hmm.
so you wouldn't have the same kind of armors. And they also had separate rules for using things that were made of bone, obsidian,
Yeah,
stone.
they would break or
They were
things like
heavier.
that.
They would break. They didn't do as much damage. Like Ted tried running a Dark Suns game, but he was going to be like just reskin everything and use it. And there were definitely members amongst us who were like, "This sucks. This is dumb. Why are we even playing Dark Sun if we're not going to have crappy equipment?" So
Yeah. Yeah, the
but
only Dark Sun thing I have right now is from my favorite edition.
the internet doesn't want to see it, man.
Yeah, 4E campaign thing. Yeah, boy, that's another setting. I feel like third edition would really be the meat of it, because remember, third edition had feats like Sunder and stuff
Yeah.
like that, and it's just like, oh boy, like, although that would require a tremendous amount of additional like crunchiness though, because it's like, what if I sunder a bone weapon as opposed to an obsidian one? Or, did you ever play a character like that in third edition that just like
Broke
leaned into
stuff.
like, I'm just gonna destroy your stuff? Oh yeah, those were fun. Where it's like, I destroyed your weapon, I destroyed his shield and armor, that you got nothing left, man.
They the thing to do there was to be the DM and create that NPC.
Yeah, yeah,
it was
yeah,
like
yeah, for real.
it was like all the horror of a rust monster, but much more dangerous.
Yeah, it's, Parks had said, oh, with the one D&D, you can now make the mule. I always
Yeah.
said mole, but I think it's actually mule.
Yeah, I used to call it a mole too, but yes, I believe they're
carried
mules.
above. Yeah, that's another case. It's like, I don't know, there's, I'm interested when official stuff comes out, and I always look at it. It's like, I just don't care. Like, I don't understand
Yeah.
that divide when people, it's
Oh,
like,
you know
if
what
it
I
ain't
found?
official, I ain't playing with it. It's like, just,
What
you make a mole race, just do it.
One of the comments that I found kind of interesting was the people that were excited about getting tremor sense for a dwarf, but specifically because they felt like stone cutting was useless. I'm like, I feel like I use that all the time when I play dwarf characters. I mean, maybe not all the time, but often.
I feel like a lot of that stuff, the tools are another area, and just like background features. We talk about it all the time where it's like there's too much assumption that the DM is going to do all those things.
Yeah.
And not the player. It's like, that's on you, man. Like, you want your stone cutting to be relevant, then bring it up.
Be interested
right?
in architecture, my
Yeah,
friend.
right. Like, make it part of, like, it's a role-playing game and something like that. Maybe it didn't have a snazzy mechanical benefit, like, ooh, tremor sense, but it's like, well, then bring it up, it's, just use it as role-playing. Like, well, I'm a dwarf. I would probably be interested in stone and find it curiosities about it. So ask about the stonework around you. And it's like, hey, maybe, they might end up being better than tremor sense. I mean, maybe you'll find a secret door that opens, to some treasure or something like that.
So here's the list of campaign settings that I've got, minus what is already out, but still including what has been mentioned. So we got
these are in all of D&D history.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I did cut out some like Warcraft. I'm like, okay, you're gone.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Oh yeah, I actually owned it. May still own it. I don't know. So even though I've never played the MMO, Planescape, Nentur Vale, Mysteria, or is it Mysteria?
Mystara.
Mystara, Lankmar. I think I did delve into that a little bit.
I like
Kingdoms of Kalamar, Jackandor, Greyhawk, Ghostwalk. And then under Forgotten Realms, they have that whole list that I went over earlier. Eberron, Dragonlance, Dark Sun, Council of Worms, Blackmoor, and Birthright.
I guess if you're considering all the, I'm thinking of all like the 3rd edition splat books. Like Ghostwalk. There was tons of those.
Yeah. Like I said, I even pared this down a little if I didn't think like it was like core enough.
Yeah, like something like Ghostwalk, like that's a cool like campaign setting, like we were talking about at the beginning, where it's like that's so different enough where like, yeah, I'll take a look at that.
Yeah, like Council Worm, Ghostwalk, like those things have some appeal to me. Everon's one of the very few official settings I ever ran. Like I ran a campaign back in 3rd edition and early 5e before we had anything really. Maybe we had the playtest for the Warforged, like the very first one. Yeah. I ran a handful of one-shots for Eberron. But a lot of these I feel like you could just get the books and run that setting.
Yeah. Right, because to me a lot of them it's just about selling the sizzle of like what's it look like and like what's it feel like. Lankmar is a great example, right? Like they don't really do anything that's like outside the realm of like standard fantasy tropes, right? Like they go into tombs and find treasure and there's thieves guilds and stuff. But I also like read the books and more than the books, there was a series of graphic novels that Mike Mignola illustrated back in the day that were like, so to really sell like what it looked like and stuff. So like to me, that's like settings like that. That's why I don't care about like when they're like, oh, there's a book about this. It's like that's cares. but something like Ghostwalk or something like that is much more interesting because it's like, oh, now we're like playing ghosts and things, and
it's like, much totally different.
Yeah. So like I guess even Greyhawk, it's like I find some of that stuff interesting, and like any other DM, it's like if I come across something that sounds neat, even if it's just like the name of something, I'll throw it in my world or whatever. And I mean, we're talking Greyhawk, it's like pretty much every like classic D&D thing, entity is from Greyhawk. Like Vecna, just Farazdan and just Cass and just tons of stuff.
Honestly, when I look at Forgotten Realms, I just see Greyhawk, but more of it.
Yeah, Forgotten Realms. I mean, I read all the novels and I appreciate it, but it's like it never, and I'm sure there's people like maybe Jordan at PH is Silent is like a real buff of that. It's like, wow, this is amazing lore. I mean, maybe like spoiler alert, just in general, like I don't care about other people's lore. Like I never read something like, wow, that's amazing, or like when you're reading like the marketing for like a Kickstarter campaign setting, I just think like, it's just a bunch of made up names like the whatever empire is threatening this thing, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot of the Forgotten Realms novels. as well, like all with the Spellfire stuff, and I don't know if the books came first or the computer games, like Pool of Radiance and all those, and then
I
also
liked
like
those Moonshae books a lot. Those are some of the more
they were
memorable Forgotten Realms ones.
they were pretty early. I think they were pretty early
And
books.
oddly enough, even now that seems like it's got enough kind of distinctive flavor that like I wouldn't mind seeing something about that. I mean, it was it like very Celtic kind of? I mean, there was a lot of those
Yes.
sort of things. Like Druidism was big there. I think Furbolgs were, like prominent there. Just that kind of stuff. It was sort of like the Irish Isles, right? Like,
Yeah, but the Furbolgs were much different than they are now.
oh yeah, yeah. But yeah, I remember like Druidism was like they're like really important to those
Yeah, the
people. It
Time
just
of
has a cool
Trouble.
name, Moonshae Isles. It sounds
The Time of Troubles novels were really good. That I remember. Like they may suck now if I go back and read them. I don't know.
Mhm.
Remember reading them as a teenager. Um, Threat from the Sea. That was I don't know if that was 4 or 5 books, but that was really good. That was Mel Autumn, and I think it was the only series he did for D&D, and then he came back and wrote a Gamma World novel for
Mm.
the 4th edition Gamma World rule set, but a novel set in that, and it was called Wake Up Dead, and it was fantastic.
Hmm.
And you can see how he's playing. You can see he was like playing on the rule. When I saw that he wrote that book, I'm like, oh, he probably just wrote this because he wanted to. They're probably not paying him nearly what he's worth or what he gets now. Because when you go back and look at his writing, it's all like TV and
Yeah.
film now.
Let's see. I'm just catching up with chat.
Uh,
No real questions. That's interesting. I treated Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk on the same globe, just on opposite sides. Yeah, like to me, Greyhawk always just seemed like it was the medieval dial was turned up and the
yeah,
fantasy dial was not quite as high. Forgotten Realms was just like with the magic, like or in fantasy. It was way more fantastical than Greyhawk. That
yeah.
still felt
Greyhawk was very
somewhat
much
rooted in.
like trying to be Tolkien,
Yeah,
esque in the way
in
the
the
way it
approach
was.
to the
Yeah.
fantasy. Yeah, it
Where
wasn't
Forgotten
like
Realms is like Ed Greenwood was like pounding beers and just writing stuff down. I mean, like
which
this
is
would
cool.
be
I mean,
cool.
and it's it might not be my favorite setting and all this. It's like, but it endured and it was certainly caught people's attention. And now it's sort of like that
Yeah,
that bar of fantasy realms. It's like, well, how fantastic is it? We're talking like Forgotten Realms, or
I remember seeing a panel and it was like I think R.A. Salvatore was on there, Ed Green was on, Ed Greenwood was on there, and a couple other writers, and they were just kind of like openly ribbing him about selling Forgotten Realms
oh,
to
because of bad deal.
yeah, he probably got like a case of beer and $500 or something, right? And now it's like a multi-million dollar property.
I guess one strange thing with campaign settings, and the older I get, maybe I don't know if it has anything to do with age. Really, like the more I play and think about these games, the more I think about it, is like I'm surprised. Like Forgotten Realms is a good example. Like we've pointed out, there's all these other places, like there's Al-Qadim and blah blah blah. Because I think like it's an entire planet. So
Yeah,
like like Greyhawk, it's like and Oath, as I believe the planet
I
is
always said
pronounced.
Orth, but I don't know how it's actually
I think
pronounced.
it's because there's a lot of like corny stuff. I mean, Gary Gygax was pretty cornball guy. I think it's
Yeah,
actually pronounced Oath,
like a
like a
Jewish
New
guy
Yorker.
saying
Yeah,
saying Earth.
really. I'm not even joking. But as I understand, I think it's like at 3 or maybe 10 times the size of Earth, right? So it's like, yeah, I mean, you got I've seen the map of Earth. I was like, what else is out there? It's like all those other things could be there too. So, you know, in those sense, it's like, well, even if you're making your own homebrew setting, like think about and again, you're talking like at least for until they're higher level characters that have like teleport and stuff, they ain't gonna be going too far, right? And it's like even in our modern world, I haven't been that many places. It's like it's like if there's some land on the other side of the globe, I mean there is, like I've never been to China. It's like it's a lot different than here,
Yeah.
So even in your own setting, it's like you can expand into anything you want. That's kind of why earlier editions, when we played modules, we didn't really brew a setting so much because it was just like, we're just playing these adventures. They could be anywhere.
I mean, that is one of the good things that Forgotten Realms did, is having like these diverse biodomes and cultures and a lot of different places to explore. And the only setting I feel like did that really well was Eberron. I think that's part of the appeal for me. Like they had a lot of interesting places that as a player or as a DM you would want to visit, take your players to.
Yeah.
And then, you know, to either take that even further with Eberron, then they gave you ways of getting there.
Right. Yeah, airships and stuff, which are, you know, like Eberron was almost like the Final Fantasy version of a setting, right? Because it's like, you know, a lot of those games had like swords and magic and all that stuff. It's like there's also like magical robots and airships and things like that. Eberron, I have a particular fondness for him because I was very much into D&D Online for since beta. I have a founder's helm and everything. But I haven't fired it up in years. But I would play. But they've since, you know, there's like Greyhawk stuff and Ravenloft. But it was primarily set in Eberron and Zendrick. So like I have like a visceral experience with it because it's like I spent a lot of time just like immersed walking through that world of Eberron. So to me, that's how I picture it.
So
and you could go to Sharn and all that stuff.
Did the Founder's Helm go into your Tinder profile?
No. It actually sucked. It just gave you like +1 to like skill checks or something.
Son of a.
Well, whatever. It's cool at the time. I mean, you know, when that game first started, that was like a big deal, you know. So that's how I kind of picture that.
Yeah, I feel like I made a character and played like, you know, for a little bit and just didn't go anywhere with it.
Oh, it blew us away. I remember when I first came across that game, it was Christmas Eve, whatever year that was. And I called my friend Brad, who gamed with me, like D&D tabletop for a long time too. And I was like, oh man, there's a D&D MMO. I was like, I'm downloading the client right now. He's like, I'm at my, I think it's with future wife's like parents' house or whatever at the time. He's like, I'm gonna excuse myself and run home and start downloading and come back. So he like left their Christmas party, drove home to download the client, and we were just blown away because it was like, you know, it's like a real time game. There's no like grid or anything, so you could move, you could jump and like climb up stuff. When you go into stealthy, it would actually like get shadowy and like you could see the footfalls. So we were like, oh yeah, this is really like a dungeon crawl. It was amazing. And you know, it's funny. I played all those adventures so many times. Like I know them so well that it's like I've used them in tabletop many times just on the fly because it's like, yeah, sure, I remember enough of that map. It's like I remember like there was a secret door here and there, and I've done that a lot, even with you in so many instances.
There was an article I shared the other day, maybe it was today, that there's an AI out there that you can kind of sign up for, and it kind of puts out the adventure for you. And there's like a free version and a paid version for if you want more AI. I feel like there was a YouTuber. I feel like they ran an adventure that way. Like there was an actual GM, but then they would like filter the AI through the person just to see what the players would do and see if they could tell the difference. I don't remember the outcome of the experiment though.
That makes me think of, I don't think it's like, you know, this isn't like a paid sponsorship or anything, but that thing you had come across, I think you made a video, it's like pen, dice, and paper, is that what it's called?
Pen, dice, and paper, yeah.
Seems appropriate for campaign settings. That's just like a one-click, and it just makes a sandbox for you, which could be a whole campaign setting. I mean, it's basically like a big hex map with like, and you can you know, set all these little dials of like, how many of this do you want? Do you want a lot of this and that and everything? And it's like, I was messing around with it the other day. Very in depth. Like if you turn everything up, it's a huge map with a lot of stuff. And it's not even just like little hints. They'll have like entire, like, you know, dungeons and stuff. It was quite impressive. Did you play around with it much? I thought that was. I do that. I like doing that stuff for games, even if you just pull.
Yeah,
Like
we
a little.
definitely played around with that a little bit. But also, speaking of paid sponsorship, I guess we should mention our sponsors for this
Yeah.
evening: Easy Roller Dice, whether it's your first set of dice or your 1 millionth set of dice. Easy Roller Dice for all your dice rolling needs. There's a link in the description as well as a one-time coupon code for 25% off. So go show the sponsor some love and check them out.
Yeah, while you're down in the description, you might also notice a link to our Mage Forge pre-order, which isn't going to be open for too much longer as we're finishing up production on some of the things that y'all will get. So if you want to go check that out, you can get those.
Yeah, this week we'll be putting out the digital book for Mage Forge, so people will be able to finally download that, and then we'll be working on getting those assets completely finished up so we can get it off to the printer.
That's been pretty exciting.
Get that finally finished up. Yes.
Yeah.
More items from the Nerdarchy verse.
Yeah, right. From our campaign settings, man. Not all of them, but there's a heck of a lot of items that are from our personal games and things like that in there.
There's quite a few of them have made appearances on our streams.
Oh yeah, Pigpen and Last Breath is in there. I love that Pigpen. That mall. That was, what was her name? Jean?
Jean, yeah.
What was her character's name? I don't remember.
I don't remember the name of the character.
Wasn't she like a gnome that had been polymorphed into a tiefling or something?
A gnome that either polymorphed or maybe reincarnated into it.
Oh yeah,
into a tiefling, and it was the best because while she would play, her cat would always wander around behind her, and you would just see the tail like over her shoulder.
She was a great player.
Yeah, so that was definitely a lot of fun, and that was that was a game that took place in our Elfgania setting, which is essentially where we run all of our stuff, and it is basically kind of our version of generic fantasy, I want to say.
But that's what's kind of neat about it, though, because it's not generic to you, like all the people and places. It's like they mean something, and I guess that's why I usually don't care a whole lot about other people's lore, because it's like it doesn't mean anything to me until I've played there. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you need to get a few sessions in to start like living in that world.
Right, and then at that point, it's you've kind of like made it your own. So it's like, well, because full disclosure, like I'm not going to memorize all somebody's lore or care that much about it. It's like, even if I read it, that's cool, and like introduce it, and it's like, I probably forgot half of it.
Yeah, like we've been in one shots where the GM is like, here's all the cool stuff about my world, and like and clearly like the fan base that watch those streams really enjoy that stuff because they've been watching a bunch of games, but just being like an outsider coming in for the first time, knowing it's a one shot, it's like I really don't care. Like my hard drive is pretty full, so like investing in all this new information that I'm not going to use again has very, very low appeal. And that's a lesson for GMs in general when you're creating your own campaigns and your settings and your worlds. It's like no one wants your world viable session one, right?
Right.
They want to experience your world and live it, and the more you can do that, the more excited they're going to get about it.
One of my favorite campaign settings, honestly, we're going to be revisiting very soon, which is the World of Those Bastards. And, I'm not 100% certain, but I'd be willing to bet that Robin doesn't even have that many notes about it. They just have like a pretty good idea of like, things they want to do, and they're creative, so they come up with things. So to me, and then also trusts like the players in their games to embrace it and engage with the thing and sort of make the world come alive together. So like, I don't know how much of that was pre-planned, but just the fact that like there was a whole town of like different kinds of bird folk, and the fact that they were menaced by like a large snake seemed like appropriate and cool and exciting. And, and there was like just like there was deserts and castles made of glass and all sorts of, I don't know. It was just cool. It's fun. Like there was just like elemental, like youth, run wild in this one town and stuff like that. It was really interesting. And it felt like we really like inhabited it, you know what I mean? Like all the lore, it's like, yeah, that doesn't mean anything if I don't feel like my character like actually lives there.
I would say like, the way that I run is like I have some broad strokes down as my notes, and then I start filling in those notes from what the players do in the session, and that starts becoming the things that kind of like shape the world. But in addition to that, like for that group, for those players, those elements of the world are going to be so much more exciting. And even if they come back with new characters, they'll still be exciting because they experienced them. But if I were to take all those notes and plop them into a new world Bible and start with a new group of players, it's not going to get the same reaction because they didn't experience, they didn't live it, they didn't get the they didn't get the visceral feel of that world. It's just going to be like a GM just info dumping on them.
You're right. Let's see. A question in the chat: would giving grapple to zombies in a horde be OP? Is grapple like a monster trait? I can't think.
Yeah, well, some monsters have the grab when they hit you. You can use.
Yeah. I mean, OP. It depends on your game. Yeah, it's thematic. I actually think that's kind of a cool idea to represent a zombie horde. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I never really thought about that because it's like, yeah, zombies are not really that dangerous, and they don't have like Walking Dead style. Like if they hurt you, you're gonna turn into a zombie. You know what I mean? So they don't really have that danger to it. So that's actually pretty cool. I like that. So Parks, I think he says zombies can grapple anyway. I think here's what Dave said.
Anybody could.
They hit you and you're grappled, like escape DC.
And also you could have fun with it if you wanted to make it more tactical in your game, and like maybe you create a trait where it's like if 2 or more zombies or 3 or more zombies are near adjacent to the same target, and one of them hits, they're also grabbed, right?
Yeah, maybe, or if you wanted to get really crazy too, it's like maybe if like 3 or more zombies grab you, it's like they can do damage because they represent like they're tearing at you. Like zombies do,
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, not instead of it being just a typical grapple check, where it's like because there's 3 of them around you, if any of them hit you, you're automatically grabbed. Like some monsters have, And then, but once you're grabbed, like then they all are gonna have advantage to hit you. Like you might even be like, oh, they're gonna pull you to the ground, and then they're just gonna start piling on top of you.
Wow, now that got me thinking even more about that. Like, I think it would be interesting to make a stat block that is just a zombie horde, basically like a swarm of zombies.
Yeah.
And it's just like if it hits you, you're grappled. That way it's like, well, there's no, you're not grappled by like that zombie. It's just like you just got grappled by the horde, man. Like, so there's no limit to how many.
There might be a place to steal from Pathfinder there because I think they did something called mobs that are kind of like swarms.
Cobalt Press did something like that too. It was like drunken mob or something for like a tavern brawl. But you could also get, I'm imagining something like maybe a what do you call it? Like a little bullet points like of different options you can have. Like when they grab, like they can make a character prone, or they can like move you 10 feet so they could like pull you into the horde so you can't get out. Like moving in the horde is difficult to
We're thinking really close because my thought was if you want to do like a true horde, you have a bunch of them, and then once you're grappled by the horde, they begin moving you in deeper to the horde. So like the swarm doesn't move per se, but say the swarm takes up 10 squares, right?
Right.
But round 1, you get grappled. Round 2, they move you 10 foot deeper. So each round, they're moving you deeper and deeper into the horde, which the reason why this is kind of cool and thematic is, in theory, you're separating one of the players from the rest of the group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. And I've been watching a lot of Walking Dead, so I just got zombie hordes on the map. Yeah, that sounds pretty sweet. Thanks for the question, Stephen Whitehead. That's awesome.
Yeah, so you can definitely have some fun with it. I love like homebrew rules like that. That are specific to the encounter.
Especially for me, especially when it's like some kind of like boring, generic, or low challenge monster to like make them really cool and threatening in like an interesting way.
So
like Shadows, one of my favorite.
one of the things to do with something like that as well is have them arrive on the scene where the horde is already there, and have them see somebody get dragged into the horde and rip the barn or something.
True. Yeah, I mentioned that. I touched on that idea in my editorial this week about sight. I'm just like, a lot of times your monsters, like, you can kind of help sell the sizzle by, like, when the characters see them the first time, they're doing something to something else. Like, like show like a fire giant just tearing somebody in half or whatever, or just like smashing them against the wall and turning them into a smear or whatever it is. Or in that case, like. Or like you were talking about with the burr hag, it's like, when the players first see her, it's like they are feasting on some creature that died in the last minute, so they immediately have to make that maddening feast save because it's so horrifying to see.
Well, if you got a cool ability like that, you might as well just use it.
Let's see. We had a 3 question mark question. Why do we always make games built to be fun so ridiculously complicated? Well, there's a lot of absolutes in there, so I don't know if I'm on board there. I don't know who we is.
It's it's very subjective as to what is complicated. Like 5e is a very simple D&D game, but I don't consider it simple compared to maybe some other games that we played.
Yeah.
That are like 1 page total.
But as far as like why, maybe that, I don't know if they're referencing like what we're talking about zombies. I would just say because it's kind of fun to just speculate. Like, well, we know what zombies do thematically, and the fantasy of that is exciting and thrilling. But it's also a game, and coming up with like a reasonable way to represent that is just fun.
And also, like, part of it too is just that after you play any game for a while, a lot of the stuff becomes vanilla, right? Like, a horde of zombies is supposed to be scary. It's supposed to get a certain emotion out of the people at the table. But if you've been playing D&D for a long while, you're not going to get that feeling or emotion from people. So, but you might be able to do it with mechanics and change it up. And also too, like, things can become very rote and mechanically boring when you don't change it up and add. Yes, the trade-off is you're adding in a little bit of complication in some cases, but otherwise it's like, okay, I run up, I hit it with my sword, it claws you, I hit it with my sword, it claws you, until one of you are out of hit points, right? So trying to make it a little bit more exciting and fun than that.
Especially something like a zombie in D&D, because like I said, unlike a lot of like, movies and TV, they don't do anything when they hurt you except just do damage. They don't cause disease or, turn you into a zombie. They don't drain your strength. They maybe, if the DM gets lucky, they'll get back up with like 1 hit point.
Yeah, that's that. I mean, when they first came out with 5e, and they did have that one ability for the zombie that definitely felt thematic. But then you start playing and realize, well, it's not as cool as it seemed when you first looked. It doesn't play the same way. Occasionally it does, but it's not as exciting in play as it looked on paper.
I do algebra all the time, so whenever I want to solve for x. So that doesn't bother me.
Also, 5e is so far away from algebra.
Yeah.
That especially after having played with Speed Factor and Thaco. Oh.
Yeah, right. Oh my God, Speed Factor. Yeah, that was like calculus practically.
I think the trick really is to make interesting mechanics that are not complex. And
yes, although I must. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. Just having like if simple rules like, oh, you have 3 zombies near you. When you get hit, you might be grabbed now, right? And it's going to be like you're going to have to spend your next turn trying to get away.
Makes it scary.
While you're grabbed by them, they're going to move you deeper into the horde. It's not particularly complex to come up with something like that. But like if you do a bunch of opposed rolls and if you go back anywhere towards third edition, it gets a lot more complicated.
And then you kind of lose the reason you did in the first place, which was to get that thrill or reaction, because you're just like, well, I get this plus and this and that and everything. It's like, it's like, well, you just wasted the time doing all these calculations and made it needlessly complicated.
So the thing is, right? It's like, okay, there's a horde of zombies. One of them has just grabbed Steve the fighter, and now they're dragging Steve the fighter into the horde.
And you can't see where, you just see him disappear into
the cool corpses. Thing is when the rest of the players see that and react to it, especially if they've just seen something bad happen to somebody else. As a GM, it shouldn't be your goal to just screw Steve the fighter over and have him dragged into the center of the zombie horde so he can be ripped apart. It should be so that someone else can do something really cool that maybe these guys didn't think about, or you didn't think about as a GM, that's going to create this memorable moment at the table, right? So that the barbarian, the barbarian with the new path of the giant grabs the halfling wizard and hurls the wizard into the mob right where Steve the fighter is, so that he can grab him and dimension door him out. Right? You're using some resources, some cool teamwork happened, and some cool action happened at the table.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that actually sounded pretty awesome what you just described right there.
Like that is what you're going for. It's not just to be like, oh, now I got Steve grabbed and he's being drugged into. No, we want to do something cool and fun at the table, and have your players have options so that their creativity can be rewarded for things that they think of.
And also, players like using their abilities and crunching things and overcoming those things, like just dovetailing what you just said, basically, where it's just like, oh, well, this fight, instead of just like fireballing the horde of zombies, I'm going to do something different. So it's cool in that way. Although I do feel compelled to say, if you are looking for more of a narrative experience without it, then play Quest. And I don't even mean that like throwing shade or anything. It's my top game for that very reason. I love D&D, I always will, but it's like, when you just want to like, look, I just like the fun action-packed stuff and just get rid of all the BS, try Quest. And there's plenty of info on our website about that. And it's free.
In our Shadow the Demon Lord game, we the town was using the tavern as like the safe house against the zombies, and they had they kind of fortified.
Oh yeah. Ted, I think, mentioned a little bit about this. This is pretty. So exciting.
We soaked the inside of it in oil, and then lured the zombies in, and then after having distracted them, so the townsfolk could get out the back door, and then we ended up locking them all in, luring them in, locking them in, and then escaping out the windows and burning the tavern down with them all in it.
Oh, Parks, right there with you. As a player, I love almost dying in an encounter. Yes, me too. I feel let down if I don't almost. That's why I like playing tanks. I don't care about doing damage or anything. It's like, I want to just take it on and help my friends and jump in front of the bullet or sword or whatever. I like that kind of stuff. And you'll get to see a lot of them, those bastards, next week. Are we playing next week?
No, we take 2 weeks off between games.
Oh, okay. So in 2 weeks, Parks. Parks, you've been around a long time. I don't know if you remember those bastards, but we're all super stoked to revisit those crazy.
Well, it's funny, at our Saturday night game this weekend, one of the players was pitching us this idea for a game where everyone plays a half race and they're all related. I that sounds like a fun idea.
Yeah.
But we are just past the hour mark, so we're going to wrap things up. But we'll be back here, not tomorrow night for our game as we usually would be, because that's the first week we're taking off. And then next week we're off, and then we'll be back with those bastards. But we will be back to do our live chat 12 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. So with that, until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.